Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard to ADX Live HD, powered by Jetline Systems. Once again, everyone, it's nice to have you on board with us this lovely Saturday morning. I think for a lot of you, it's probably Saturday afternoon. And this morning we have Jared Marshall joining us from Orbx. He has done an absolutely amazing job with his most recent product, Orbx Monterey, which of course is just north of Los Angeles here. A nice drive along the Pacific Coast Highway, about maybe 5 or 6 hours. It's a very nice destination, home, of course, of the amazing Laguna Seca Raceway, which is actually one of the most popular raceways in the entire world, well known for its famous corkscrew hairline turn. So we're going to go ahead and get started now. Once again, welcome aboard, everyone. And Jared should be live with us. Jared, are you there?
I am indeed. Thanks very much, and a very chilly welcome from Perth in Western Australia this evening. It's a little bit cooler than what we are normally used to, but it's great to be here, and thanks very much for having me along.
I'm glad I could actually finally get to meet you. Not in person, of course, but at least live. And hear your voice a bit. I know we've chatted quite a bit over the last, I suppose, year or so, but we've never had the chance to actually touch bases with each other. You've certainly done quite an amazing job with Monterey, I have to say, and just following your line of developments and the products that you've worked on over the past few years, your technique has stepped up tremendously each time. And there were a number of things, because I've done sort of the ADX First Look articles in regards to some of the products you've done in the past, and some things that I have noted, or I should say nitpicked on, because it's hard to find things that are wrong with your scenery. So I nitpick, and it's funny to see those little nitpicks actually get worked out with each scenery. So it's nice to know that someone's taking a look, and I'll go into some of those areas here. But before we start 100%, I just want to tap the audience and make sure that everyone can hear me okay, and that of course, Jared is coming in clear as well. So if there's any complaints, I'd like to get that out right in the beginning, and then we'll go ahead and kick off. So let's just give that a few seconds, just in case anyone has any trouble with the audio.
And I'll just do a test again, just to make sure that everyone can hear me fine at my end.
And of course, we wait for the delay. And also, folks, if you notice the screen, if there's any issues with the stream, also any feedback would be good as well. If anything is pixelated, or if the screen is freezing up, anything like that, definitely shoot me your feedback so that I can make any corrections that are necessary. But we've run some tests, so everything so far seems okay, but definitely be sure to give us your feedback. Now, Jared, of course, this is your masterpiece, so I think we're going to sort of start off with the scenery and start off with you a bit in terms of perhaps what you think is probably the most important area of the scenery to get started, and we'll get underway in our little Alabeo R66 here.
Sure. That's a little bit of a tricky question. I think for me, you've picked exactly the right location to start off with, just in front of the Del Monte Aviation FBO there. There are a couple of large FBOs that are based at Monterey, and without being too much of an expert of the area, I get the impression that it's quite a wealthy part of the state and the country, and obviously that wealth's on show with a couple of these large FBOs catering for the corporate crowd. So this one here was something that I was fairly happy with how it turned out. I spent a little bit more time particularly on the terminal building there, with putting a few little extra details, both airside and non-airside there. So that's probably something that's a good place to start off with. And I suppose without picking details or focusing on any area, perhaps maybe if we just sort of head south to the southern extent of the coverage area, just down near Carmel, and then perhaps take a bit of a look north and towards Laguna Seca, that would be great.
Sounds excellent. So I guess we'll go ahead and start off with the main terminal area here. Now, unfortunately for me, and I think I've mentioned this quite extensively over the course of the last several months, is for 2014, and I give full thanks to FTX NCA, which of course is the Northern California region, the latest region by Orbx, is that finally I'm starting to see a lot of developments just in my home state. I have traveled quite extensively throughout the world in real life. And so a lot of the airports that I have reviewed are probably majority is probably in Europe. And I've done a lot of traveling in Europe, so I visited a lot of the airports that I have reviewed. But most of my reviews tend to, I think, lean in the direction of Europe. And I think the reason being is Europe has probably collectively the largest flight simulation community. So that goes without saying that most of the airports we've seen have been in Europe, but we have started to see more of an influx of airports start to arrive in the United States as well. I mean, of course, there's always been the legacy products like LA or JFK and a lot of the mega airports, which I think generate a lot of revenue for flight simulation enthusiasts. But one thing we have not really seen are sort of the smaller regional airports. Certainly, Orbx has delivered a lot of the smaller VFR airfields and aerodromes, but I suppose you could say the regional airport as it is something that I think is a direction that Orbx has moved into over the last year or so. And for the most part, every airport that has been chosen to me has been amazing. I mean, if we go back and look at, for example, Bozeman in Montana, that is an incredible airport, an airport that most developers probably wouldn't look at because maybe it's too small. So I think it may be a niche to go into some of these regional airports, but I personally think that there is a lot of interest in these airports, and of course, no one would probably know better than you, or at least the guys who are crunching the numbers at Orbx, because you guys seem to keep making them, and so far the feedback has been very positive.
Yes, and certainly I'm trying to do my best, and all the guys at Orbx are as well, to try and sort of find that right balance between what our customers are looking for in an airport, and also just as importantly, given the amount of time that's spent on a project, it's got to be something that appeals to me as a developer as well. And I found over the last couple of years, particularly, that working on these mid-sized airports seems to provide the nice balance, both for me as a developer and for end user customers, in that it provides a nice balance to cover all kinds of sims. So people who like to fly the low and slow general aviation types, or like yourself who like to buzz around the helicopters, they can get a lot out of these kinds of airports. But just as much at the other end, guys who like to fly the NGX or the Q400 or anything like that, these kinds of airports also provide them with a location where they can fly in. And also, for me personally, these sort of mid-sized airports provide the sort of perfect canvas to be able to make an airport that is big enough that it's got a lot of interesting different components to check out, but also that it's small enough that I'm able to spend a little bit more time on some aspects and add quite a lot more detail that I wouldn't be able to with, say, a much larger project like a JFK or an LAX.
And I certainly think you've hit the nail on the head. In fact, I think that's probably the best thing about these smaller airports is that I think what many people are most concerned about is, of course, VAS usage, memory usage, and it almost doesn't matter how powerful your machine is. I mean, of course, I'm using quite a powerful machine by Jetline Systems, and whereas I may not run into a lot of performance issues, there's always going to be a memory issue no matter how great your system is or how much you may spend on your system. And the reason being is, of course, the limitations of the simulator itself. So one of the things I think we've seen lately is, especially with developers that mostly focus on your larger mega airports, is they've come up with some really, really interesting techniques in terms of how they've been able to refine the quality and yet not allow it to give an OOM every time someone arrives. So I think that's a great thing about it. But in the case with these smaller regional airports, is I think it's exactly what you said. You have the ability to add a lot more detail because number one, it is a smaller airport, but number two, you're not necessarily alienating any sort of flight simulation enthusiasts. So there are people who prefer the NGX and will not bother with the Cessna. And of course, there are people who prefer general aviation and they will not bother with the larger commercial aircraft. So what's great about these regional airports is it's sort of a niche right in the middle that everyone can enjoy. It has the feel of a small sort of airfield, backwood country airport, and yet anyone can fly almost any narrow body aircraft in here. So that's sort of the thing in between the two. And even looking at Monterey, similar to Bozeman, is that they both carry runways that are, of course, suitable for larger aircraft, but also runways that are suitable for smaller aircraft. So if you decide you want to fly in your small Beechcraft C90 or Cessna C172, you still have the smaller runway to enjoy, which, of course, to me is fun because keeping it on the center line with such a small runway on a crosswind is always a challenge. So that's definitely fun for the small aircraft, which of course gives this airport that sort of small airfield feel to it. And yet, if you decide, okay, I think I'll switch aircraft and jump into the Majestic Q400 or the Quality Wings Avroliner or the PMDG NGX, you still have that opportunity to take off and go off into a larger mega airport. So I think that's the great thing about these smaller airports, is it hits the head right in the middle. And I know that one of the complaints that I used to see about Orbx is people would say, wow, you guys started off with Brisbane and Melbourne, and now all you're doing are these small, backwood, backcountry runways, and they're not fun anymore. And so I think what you guys have done is you've found the niche sort of right in the middle where those people no longer have a reason to complain. And on the same token, you still don't alienate those who really appreciate the smaller airports. And certainly Monterey is probably thus far in terms of the FTX airports, because not only is it perfect, but then again, I'm also biased because it's in my home state of California, even though I haven't been here yet. But now I have a reason to pop by on my next trip to San Francisco.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and just going back to your comment that you were saying about some people asking after smaller fields when we were working on the Australian airports, so the big ones like Melbourne and Brisbane and Cairns and Canberra and the likes. And it's really interesting, and I think that it's a nice sort of testament to the wide variety of users that use Orbx products, in that irrespective of what projects we're working on, we'll always get some requests for different projects. So we'll get requests for the larger airports like we used to do, or we'll get requests for the smaller airports, or we'll get them for the regional. And that's nice because it sort of gives us different things to aim for, and certainly sows a few different ideas in our heads as to what potential projects we can move on to once we finish whatever we're working on at the time. But I just put a little bit of the caveat in there, in that the largest project that probably from a development time point of view that I've personally done was my second project with Orbx, which was Cairns International for Australia, and I worked on that for about 18 months, and
oh, wow.
It just drove me insane, and I still have nightmares about doing it. So whenever I get a great spark of an idea and think about, oh, this would be great to do this enormous project, I quickly balk at it and think back to when I was working on Cairns and just how long it took to do that one.
Now, here's one little area that I'm going to now point out. If anyone who's watching this morning read the ADX First Look of Bozeman, one of the things you'll find is that I found the scenery to be pretty much immaculate. It was difficult to find anything that was wrong with the scenery, because I know there are a lot of people out there, when they look for a review, the first thing they look for is, well, tell me what was wrong with it, and then I'll hear what's good about it. And at the end of the day, if something's good, it's good. So what I then do is I go in and I start in with the nitpicking. And in the case of Bozeman, that's essentially what I did. And I remember because after I did my nitpicking, I got an email from you, and you had a very reasonable explanation as to why certain things were done the way they were, and of course, it made perfect sense. But I'm going to mention that area now, and that's sort of the area that I'm trying to hover over right now, and that's the parking lot. And people who
Uh-huh.
read my reviews, they know that I tend to nitpick about the dumbest things that no one could care about. Who would care about a parking lot? Who cares about cars, trees, or shrubs, or rather, if the parking lot has the same level of texture resolution as the ramp area? And that was just because that's all I could really nitpick about Bozeman. So with Bozeman, I think what I pointed out was the fact that at high elevation it looks okay, but when you get closer to it, it almost looks like the cars are parked on sort of dirt or sand or something of that nature. And one of the things I mentioned was I would like to see Jared get into a better, sort of higher resolution parking lot area. And that's only because I felt that was the only thing that was sort of bringing the airport, I don't want to say bringing it down per se, but if you look at the ramp site area, you look at the terminal textures, everything is perfect. But then you get around to the parking lot. And not that the terminal didn't look good from the parking lot, but simply the parking lot from itself, that's where the textures started to take a slide. So taking a look here at Monterey and looking at the textures of the parking lot, not only are the parking lot textures spot on in terms of the lines that the cars are parked in between. I can see the shrubs. There's little trees that you place there. Just that small, keen attention to detail. That was one of the first things that I think stood out to me with the scenery. And I know you're probably thinking, why did that stand out to you? I did so much work on this. There should be much more to that. But when I got around to the parking lot, my thought process is, wow, he really did it. And I guess for me, and I think for people who enjoy the helicopters, which probably is another niche group within the flight simulation realm, is that not too many people hop in the helicopters. So this is the part of the scenery that I think makes it more ideal for us helicopter pilots, is the fact that, well, I shouldn't say I'm a helicopter pilot, I'm not that good, but is the fact that we like to fly around and we like to look at the detail. We like to sort of admire the ground textures, the quality of autogen. And I think what's great about Monterey is you've included sort of the entire peninsula, and we'll start getting into some of those areas as well. So from a helicopter perspective, because there's really nowhere to fly in an airplane unless you fly around circles, this is a scenery that, in my opinion, is more conducive to a helicopter pilot, because you can stop, you can hover, and you can sort of admire the scenery. And I think people who are really into heavy systems intensive aircraft, they're not probably really looking at admiring the scenery as so much as they want it to just have an accurate as a representation as possible. But I think there are a group of us that will actually stop and say, hey, this is a work of art. This does take a lot of time to compile. It takes a lot of effort. And so I like to admire that. And for those of you who are watching, who are in on the the PAXM Manila live stream that I had, one of the things that I pointed out, and I sort of included Misha in on that stream in terms of referring to him, is how much autogen had to be hand placed around, or rather in the city. And it was the coverage area was so large that in a helicopter it was taking us like 15 minutes to make it from one end to the coverage area to the other end of the coverage area at high speed. So it really goes to show how much work that goes into it. And I remember something that Misha had said in regards to his current project, which is Lake Tahoe. And if I remember on the scene correctly, and I know that Ben from Airline 2 Sim is watching, and Ben may correct me, but I believe Misha said that he had to hand place something like 150,000 individual pieces of autogen. And that's huge. I mean, that's unbelievable. And if you sit there and try to count to 150,000, and if you say, well, if he places one piece of autogen every second, that still takes a long time. And I remember Misha just going into having the hand cramps and the pains that go into that. So I don't really know if everyone who buys a scenery really takes the time to admire just how much effort that goes into it. Not even to the point of creating the airport itself, but just little things like modeling autogen and then going through the tedious process of having to hand place each and every single house and building and tree. It's a very tedious process. So for those who will take the time and jump in the helicopter and fly around and admire it, that's where the scenery gets its real justice. It's not just the fact that they bought it, which of course is the impetus, obviously, but for those who really take the time and admire the work that goes into it, is very, to me, that's where the developer is really getting their high hand. That's where the Oscar goes to, if you will, in terms of that admiration. So my next question would be, given how large the peninsula is and the fact that you've had to go in and model all of this, how tedious was the autogenning process, if you will, in terms of covering the entire coverage area?
I'm glad you bring this up. I have to say, and I'm yet to meet a developer who disagrees, hand placing the autogen is the absolute bane of my existence. It is the most tedious and time-consuming aspect of any project that I've ever done. And I know that many others, including Misha, would agree with that. So, along similar lines to what you were saying that was mentioned for the Lake Tahoe project, I think the final count for Monterey, I was looking at about 120,000 hand-placed vegetation types and about 60,000 hand-placed autogen buildings. So it's not it's a large area, and it's certainly a large coverage area. It's not the biggest nor the most extensive autogen job that I've done. That would go to a project I did a couple of years ago, Jackson Hole for Central Rocky Mountains, and I went a little bit overboard with the coverage area for that. And that kind of burnt me a little bit about doing large autogen coverage areas. But for this, as sort of a breakdown, the total time that I spent on this from when I signed off and decided to do this project until the release date was about 10 and a half weeks. And of that, about 5 weeks was taken up by doing a combination of the autogen and the colorization and the editing of the ground textures, so the ground photo real textures for the entire city. So it does take up a fair portion of the development time for any airport. But as you say, I think it's an important aspect to make sure that it's done properly, because it really adds to the immersion factor. And obviously with Orbx, I'm very lucky in that I have the advantage of having access to the lovely custom autogen types that ship with the regional products. So for example, with this one in Northern California, I know that Scott Armstrong and Holger and a couple of the guys on the NCA team spent quite a bit of time making some really nice custom vegetation types exclusive to the Northern California area. So I was able to utilize them both with Monterey and Reading, and that really makes a difference. I think it really adds to the immersion and it really adds to the realism of an area. And as you say as well, just touching on another point that you were making, I've always been very strongly of the mindset that it's very important to have quite a large coverage area for a scenery. And because from my sort of approach, that whenever I'm flying into an airport, it's not just everything within the perimeter area that is what I'm interested in exploring. Like I like to have a large area to check out, whether it's what I'm seeing when I'm doing my final approach or my departure, or whether it's something that I want to go and explore around in a small aircraft or helicopter. It's that kind of aspect which is really important to me as a simmer, what I like to see when I'm flying around. And if I'm totally honest, the kind of approach that I take when one of the large aspects that I approach when I'm making a project is that I like to make scenery that I would like to fly in, and that sort of factors into this larger coverage area.
Now, one of the things I'll say, if anyone has read the part one of my tour of FTX Northern California, is I really went into just how well the entire area was covered. Now, naturally, at the time that I did it, there were, I think actually, no, as a matter of fact, Reading had not yet been released, so I wasn't able to include Reading in that particular review. It will come in the next chapter, or rather the next volume. But one of the things, and really all I had to show off, to be honest, was just the terrain itself, because essentially that's what the FTX coverage is. And as great as it is, and of all the great things that I had to say about it, when you look at the coverage area of Monterey, and I'll just pan over here to the other side, to the peninsula, and you see how good that looks. And as great as FTX Northern California is, once you get to the threshold of the scenery coverage area and you see just how different the area is, it's almost unbelievable. I guess the point that I'm getting at here is that your coverage area looks so good that I have found myself approaching in over the ocean just so I can have the sort of immersive effect of the scenery coverage area as opposed to FTX Northern California, because that's just how good it is.
Well, thanks, thanks very much. And as you say that, as I'm looking at the screen now, with you sort of facing south towards Big Sur and looking outside of the NCA coverage area, it was something which I did toy with, and was a little bit of a sort of a, not an issue, but it was something that I toyed with not moving ahead with the project, was its proximity to the borderline. But I suppose from my viewpoint, with Global and with Vector and with the upcoming North American land class product, and not to mention, of course, the Southern California region, which is in the timeline that John has published in our forums. I know that there will come a time when that will be the seamless continuation further south, and from my opinion, that's just something that we can look forward to in the next couple of years.
And how difficult is it procuring the ground image? Because obviously there is photoreal terrain under here, if I'm not mistaken. It looks like it is. How complex was it to get the imagery for the coverage area?
Well, in terms of availability, the US provides a service to the US Geological Survey, have an excellent website where they have quite a lot of good quality imagery available for use. And using Monterey as an example, I was very, very lucky that Holger and I were able to have some access to some extremely high 7 centimeter resolution imagery, which is basically using the photoreal terrain engine. That's as high as you can natively use in both prepared and FSX. And so I was very lucky in that aspect. And there have been some projects that I've done where this has been a little bit of an issue, where I've had different levels of difficulty in acquiring and licensing imagery. I remember Jackson Hole particularly provided some problems, but generally, particularly these days, the availability of commercially usable data is a lot better than it was, say, when I started doing this about 10 years ago, when it was just ridiculously, prohibitively expensive to acquire that kind of stuff.
Okay, now I'm going to ask the question. This is the big question, and you can feel free to quote unquote plead the fifth. I'm going to give you Fifth Amendment rights, so you don't have to answer the question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you ready? What would you say was your favorite project to date that you've ever worked on, that you can say this particular project is the epiphany of my abilities as a developer, and also my favorite personal destination of everything that you have worked on over the past several years? It's a tough one. You can plead the fifth if you like. That's the worst crossball or curveball I will throw you. I'll say that.
I tell you what, if you asked me tomorrow, I would probably give you a different answer. And I suppose, and wussing out and copping out on my answer, I would say that there are a couple of different projects that I've enjoyed for entirely different reasons. I suppose Monterey is definitely one in the last couple of years that I've particularly enjoyed working on. It just, everything came together quite nicely. The guy who took the photos for me, Scott Armstrong, who's a name that many of you have probably heard before and know both from working on the Northern California team, but also as an airport developer in his own right. He did Jefferson for Pacific Northwest. And so, obviously, being a developer, he had exactly the right eye when he went down and took the photos there, and that made life really easy for me in that regard. As I mentioned before, I had access to a lot of really high-quality imagery to use, and obviously I had a really nice, excellent base product with Northern California to build on top of. So everything it came together quite nicely. I think in terms of, and again, it's a hard question in hindsight to say, because obviously Monterey is my latest project, so it's got all the techniques that I'm most currently using, and it's sort of a culmination of all the different lessons that I've learned on all the projects I've ever done, and if I was, and things that might look a little bit dated now, so some of my older projects are things that I'm still very proud of, because at the time they were quite a stretch for me. So I know I mentioned before about Cairns International, but that's something that I was particularly proud of, because I spent a huge amount of time on that, and a lot of love went into that project. And that sort of, that's the largest airport I've done. It's a large international airport, but it also has a huge sort of cityscape scenery. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of detailed scenery for the city area for that. So that's something that I was quite proud of. And from a personal point of view, something that I really enjoyed working on was a project I did last year, which was Broome International, which is another Australian airport. And it was something that was as much a project for me as it was for a product itself, in that it was something that I wanted to do for a very long time. And Broome it's a small town. Most people outside Australia probably never heard of it. It's a really nice little hotel resort town on the north coast of Western Australia, and it was a place when I grew up in a town not too far from there, and I spent a lot of holidays as a kid there, and I had a lot of good memories there. And it was something that I had always wanted to do ever since I started developing scenery for Flight Simulator. And there was a combination of different aspects that came together, and I was able to do it last year. And I was really happy with how that came together, and I really enjoyed working on that one as well. And so, yeah, as I said, that's my rather cop-out answer. As I said, if you ask me tomorrow, I will give you a totally different set of airports that I enjoyed.
Well, I always like to throw that curveball at developers, because personally, I sort of see developers as not just developers, but as artists of a particular craft. And if you were to go and ask, for example, if Pablo Picasso were still alive and you were to go ask him, what is your favorite? I don't know. He'd probably kill you. I don't know. But I always like to ask, because I tend to get very interesting answers. And I think ultimately, I've never really had a developer tell me their favorite. They have things that they love about each and every one. Or you could liken it to a mother of different children. You love them all equally, but there are things that you love about them separately that make them special. So, but I always love to see what sort of response I get to that question. Now, currently we're flying over the famous Laguna Seca Raceway, and as we approach the area, my heart rate actually went up a little bit. And the reason being is, of course, I'm a huge fan of flight simulation. I love it to death. But one of the games, as far as console gaming, and I'm not into console gaming much. I mean, we have every console game that's currently available in our home, and it's essentially more or less for my stepson. I don't really get into them. But one game that I've always liked, and I remember buying every generation of the Sony PlayStation just for one particular game, and that's been Gran Turismo. And I remember when Gran Turismo 2 first came out, they debuted the Laguna Seca Raceway. And I remember Laguna Seca as always being the most difficult track of all the tracks. And I think there's something like 50 tracks on Gran Turismo 2. But Laguna Seca has always been the most difficult one. And the reason being is this sort of hairpin turn that I'm actually approaching now. I would spin out. I mean, I would be in first place, and this one little part of the track that I'm hovering over at this minute would always be the one that would make me lose the race. I would always spin out. And it took me so long to master this particular part of the track. And if anyone goes on YouTube and pulls up any real world races of Laguna Seca, that's where all the accidents tend to happen, is right here on this this sort of S turn. That's what the racetrack is actually most famous for. So I was actually very pleased to see that you added it into the scenery, which is something that you certainly didn't have to do. But again, it's little things like this that goes to further my point that I made earlier about flying around in the helicopter, is that it gives it, the scenery has something for everyone. So if you're jamming in and out in your NGX, you're probably not going to notice little things like that. And maybe a lot of those pilots may not necessarily care, but certainly for those of us who will take the time and actually survey the entire scenery. And I remember when you showed off the initial previews, a lot of people were asking, did you add this? Did you add that? Oh, did you add the aquarium? Did you add? And I remember you saying, well, I've added it. It's not going to be in 100% quality, but it's definitely there for you to enjoy. And there were certainly a lot of questions in terms of what would be added and what would not be added. So I think you've certainly found a fine line between what you did put in, what you didn't put in, and of course the level of quality of which you added it. But I imagine during the development process, you were probably going back and forth quite a bit. Should I or shouldn't I? When it comes to developing a scenery, and now that scenery coverage areas are getting larger and larger, how difficult is that process for you as a developer to determine, okay, I have to now stop here, or I will or will not add this or that? Did you find that that was difficult in Monterey, or did it seem fairly simple? I know we touched on it lightly, but...
Absolutely. It's always a difficult decision because my natural inclination is always just to add everything and just to keep going. But the reality sets in, and at some point I do have to draw the line and just sign off and say I'm happy with everything that's included here. I feel I've provided the right balance between providing a lot of different aspects for everyone to explore, but at the same time I'm not going to kill myself doing it, and it's not going to take 7 years to finish off. And certainly with Monterey, it was quite easy because for me, as a very brief visitor, I sort of I visited the area last year, and I had an idea of sort of the well-known landmarks that people that have a sort of a fleeting association with the name of the city, they would be expecting. So things like the Fisherman's Jetty and Cannery Row and obviously Laguna Seca. And basically, the way that I approach it is at the start of the project, what I'll do is I'll research the airport and the area and write basically a massive list of wish list items that I want to include. And I'll also consult different people that are local. So, for example, with Reading, one of our beta testers, Rob Newman, is actually a Q400 pilot for Horizon Airlines in real life. So he was just a font of knowledge. I was able to ask him umpteen questions about what he saw when he flies in there in real life. He was great, and had a couple other local people as well who were on our testing team who were really, really useful in that regards. Because for me, I'd never visited Reading in real life, so for me it's all intellectual. I've never actually been there myself. So I as I said, I start off with a big list, and then I look at what I can feasibly do, what I have access to the right information. So sometimes there might be a feature that I would like to do, but it's towards the lower end of the list, and I might not have access to the kind of photo sources that I need or anything like that might just sort of make it a little bit too hard to do. And certainly with Monterey, my big consideration with this being a high detailed airport, I was very wary of making sure that performance was good in the sims. So when there's things that aren't close to the airport or that I wouldn't expect when I'm flying around myself that I would look up too close at unless I was specifically looking at it, I can approach them and see that I can take a little bit of detail out of it. And as you've demonstrated with the raceway there, that's certainly the perfect case in point. So I don't pretend to say that I spent a huge amount of detail at the raceway. It's looking pretty sparse, but for someone who's flying in an approach to runway 28 left or 28 right and comes over the top of it at about 1,000 feet, it looks the part. And the same with things like the the Fisherman's Wharf and Cannery Row and whatnot. They're not things that you're going to go up and look at right up close and expect to see HD 496 textures on. But at the same point, when you're flying around from a decent altitude, they look the part and they look like they do in real life. And I'll quickly, just before I let you ask another question, I'll just touch back to what you were saying about Gran Turismo and Laguna Seca. And I have to say, to be honest, a lot of the credit for actually putting in a little bit more effort with that goes to one of my best mates here, who isn't a flight sim. He's my mate in other life, and and he's a real motorsport nut. And the first thing that I said when he was asking what project I was starting, he's like, "Oh mate, you've got to make sure that you include the raceway. That corkscrew turn is really important." It's like, I've watched all of it on the shows, and I play in Gran Turismo all the time. You've got to put in there, and so yes, that's the catalyst for where that started off.
That's actually really hilarious, but absolutely. I mean, if ever there was, because I know again there were a lot of questions about the hotel and the aquarium and everything that would be added. I think mostly what people were, or sorry, not with people. But I think when it comes to landmarks in the area, certainly that is the most important. So anything that would be added, certainly that's probably one of the most important. Now I'm trying to make an effort to go around and sort of show the entire scenery, but I don't know if there's anything else that I missed out on. I'm working my way sort of up toward the marina at the moment. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because just looking at the Autogen, of course, there's I don't want to say generic Autogen, but you have Autogen, and then you have buildings that actually stand out along with their real world counterparts. So when it comes to knowing everything that has to be done, what is the best method that you use of knowing, okay, this building should be done in its real world fashion, and it's okay for these other buildings to sort of be done sort of in a generic Autogen manner? How does that come along? I mean, do you sort of Is it mostly just based on your own visit there for you to say, okay, hey, I'll do this one, I won't do that, or how did that sort of come out?
Pardon my language, but basically my approach is, if I do the first run with Autogen, and if there's anything that sticks out, or again, pardon my language, if it looks a little bit crap with the Autogen, I'll go back over it, I'll take it out, and I'll do a custom model. So just on my feed here, I think there might be a little bit of a delay, but I saw you just fly past one of the beachside hotels. Correct. There. First two beta versions that I had out with the testing team, I had initially placed them as just regular square Autogen buildings, but I had quite a lot of feedback from the testers that were saying, this doesn't look good. It sticks out like a sore thumb when I'm doing the bay approach into the airport. So what I did is it's not an exact replica of what it looks like in real life, and I actually use Google Street View as my main reference for it. But I just I made those buildings there as a custom object just to more realistically replicate the object. And so there's a lot of instances of that around the scenery, and they're probably a little bit more subtle because they're not high resolution, and they, to be honest, they look more like Autogen than they do like a custom object. So you'll see things like shopping centres or schools or hospitals and things like that, things that have a little bit of a unique footprint on the ground that you can't quite get the right look with just Autogen objects. But at the same time, they're not full-blown custom objects like with the Cannery Row or the large hotel that you went past just a few minutes ago.
And I know there was a question about the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but I actually don't know where that is or if it indeed was included.
It was. It's not high resolution, so it's part of the Cannery Row main street. So basically the main street in the downtown area. It's just the building at the far west end of the street, and you can tell it because it has two, I think they're chimney stacks, or there's some kind of stack of some description, so you can tell them at the end of the street there.
Just trying to take a quick look over there to see it. And then, of course, there's all the golf courses.
Yes. 473 of them.
And in fact, there was a couple of guys on a golf cart, and I'm not sure which course that was. I was actually going to go down and say hello to the couple of guys out on the golf course, but I'm not sure of all the courses that are up here. I'm not sure which one specifically that was, but I thought that was actually a pretty nifty little feature as well.
Yeah, that was a cynical marketing attempt on my behalf. I made them just so that they'd look nice in a screenshot. But no. In all honesty, they're included quite close to the airport perimeter. There's some approach lighting for runway 28 right, I think, that runs just to the bay side of the airport, and they sit almost at the runway threshold. So you can see the buggy and the couple of guys in the cart floating around.
Let's see. Okay, I think I'll just. And before I head back up to the airport and land, was there any specific part of the scenery that you feel that we should definitely showcase?
Uh, no, I think you've done a wonderful job. I really appreciate it. I was gonna the only thing I think which didn't get looked at, but again will be something that I think that we can leave to the customers to go and check out in their own time. Was just the Pebble Beach area, just to the south coast corner of the coverage area. There's just some really nice terrain around there, and the Lone Cypress there as well. But again, that's something that's nice for everyone to explore in their own time.
Yeah, we'll leave a little bit something for them.
Yeah, exactly right.
In fact, though, but now I have to go over there on my own now. I think after the stream, I'll take off again and just take a look on my own. Wow, I have to imagine this is a very interesting sort of hole here, just right underneath the approach. Look at that. That's very interesting. Okay, so so for the folks who are watching, we're going to take a moment now and just sort of take a look at your questions and include you in as well. Hopefully we've covered the entire scenery area. I think I'll put the helicopter down right where I was before, next to the... I'll probably get a little bit quiet as I try to concentrate. Although this is probably not a designated helicopter landing spot, but I really love what you did with the Del Monte Aviation FBO. It was really lovely. And if anything, I'd probably say that's my favorite part of the airport, that sort of California architecture, that sort of Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a chain of Mexican restaurants in Perth that used to be a really big thing when I was growing up, and they have exactly the same kind of architecture as that building there.
Yeah, certainly the sort of Mexican culture of Los Angeles is indigenous. The way that I feel it, just to where I live. I remember I was once in Paris, and we were over in the Latin Quarter, and so for some reason we all decided to stop over into a Mexican restaurant, and it wasn't a big deal for me because I mean there's one on every corner here, but there. One of my friends was from the UK, a couple of guys were from Germany, so they really weren't that versed in the culture, so they wanted to try Mexican food. So I said, okay, let's do it. So we went in there and had dinner, and the whole music and the mariachi band was going, and then by the time we were done, which was about 3 hours later, and after maybe 5 beers, we step out onto the street, and I actually had forgotten where I was. And I'm looking up at the buildings, and I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, that's right. This is Paris. Like, it just completely threw me off. It's probably the dumbest thing ever, but certainly it was one of those moments for me because I live in an area that's called Marina del Rey, and near that we have quite a few Mexican restaurants. A popular chain is El Torito. Oh, sorry, my slewing efforts here are really bad. I wanted to get close to the building. So yeah, I'm sort of used to that. And whenever I travel to Europe or anywhere else, that's the last food that I ever eat. So because that's just considered what I would eat at home. And I always try to make an effort of not eating anything that I would usually eat if I were at home. So that was just sort of a funny thing. That was the first time I had done that. And it really sort of freaked me out for a minute there, which is really funny.
Uh-huh. I have to say that we were just talking about it with I was having dinner with a couple of friends tonight, and we were talking about sort of my girlfriend and I spent a bit of time in the US last year, and I have to say something that we do miss a little bit is that burger chain, which I think is
In and Out.
California. In and Out, love it. That's nothing quite like it. It's pretty tasty and pretty cheap. And we were just talking about tonight how we could go for a couple of those burgers right now as well.
Well, yeah, I know that we initially wanted to do this stream last weekend, and it unfortunately didn't happen because we had relatives visiting out from New York. And but one of the things about that was the second they got here, the first thing they wanted was In and Out, and I think they had it like 4 or 5 times while they were here, just to have it, before they're gone again, and they won't have it again for a few years. So, and I know the guys at Jetline Systems who are down in Tampa, I think they're actually waiting for me to FedEx them some In and Out. So we're still working out the logistics on that, but. I guess what makes that In and Out burger so great is the fact that their food is actually fresh. They don't freeze anything. So when you eat a burger, I think that's the only burger in the world that you can eat and have a feeling of, oh my God, this is fresh, and not regret it after the fact. So I think that's one of the great things about it. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I'm going to take a look over. I know that there's been quite a bit of conversating going on between the viewers this morning, and we always had an intention to get to your comments and some of your questions, so I'm going to sort of scroll down now. And Jared, if there's anything that that points out to your eye, feel free to go ahead and respond on behalf of that as well, while I sort of take a breeze.
So I might I'll work backwards, so I'll work from the bottom up here. I did notice a couple of questions, and apologies if I miss any in advance. I did see, now sorry, bear with me, there's a question here that was just asking about Broome and whether it was going to be upgraded to the new version of Prepared, and yes, that is in the works, and I haven't got to starting it yet. I am currently working on getting Reading up to the new standard. That's been my highest priority since finishing Monterey. So that'll be the next one that's out. But following that, I will be working on Broome and other airports, getting them up to standard in between and working around my current new projects as well. I'm just having a little bit of a look through here. I've got another question here, and I get asked this quite a lot, actually, to be honest. And it's the question: am I ever going to look at working on Perth International, which is my home airport? And I know that it's one that seems to get requested a lot around different forums and at ADX as well. As sort of it seems to be a relatively high demand, and it is actually about 5 minutes drive from my front door. I've got to be honest, it's not currently on my short list. I've got a short list of 2 or 3 airports that I'm looking at working on. It's not currently on them, but it is always something in my mind that I would like to do properly one day. One of the things that has been a little bit of an inhibitor of sorts for the last 4 or 5 years is that Perth Airport has been going under an enormous amount of expansion, particularly over the last 6 years. And if you have access to things like the historical Google imagery using Google Earth, you can see from that alone how much the airport has changed. And so from a development logistical point of view, that's quite a big problem, because from the start of the project to the end of the project, it will have changed quite a lot. So at the moment, they're actually working on an entirely new terminal over the international side of the airport, and I know that that's not going to be finished until March next year. So again, I'm not offering any excuses as to why I haven't done it, but it's just a little bit of an explanation. And there are a lot of other factors as well that play into that as well. But it is something that I would like to do, but I don't currently have it on my my short-term radar there. So is there any other questions that you can see there
I
that
did
I might
see
have
that, and I don't
missed?
know if this is something you can respond on behalf to, and if not, then we'll just move on. But I did see that Alpha Dog 141 asked, "Is Orbx going to continue any work on New Zealand?"
I'm sorry, I don't actually know. I couldn't answer that myself. I'm sorry that I can't give an answer for that.
Okay, just a few comments. Sid was talking. Oh, I hit the wrong button on my laptop and it scrolled all the way down to the bottom. A comment from Sid though was talking about Cairns is one of his favorite Orbx AU airports, and Broome is amazing as well. So a nice shout out for those two particular destinations.
Thanks
Just
very
going to
much.
continue to scroll down here. Let's see here. And of course, if anyone has any questions, now would be a good time to start putting them in at the bottom of the list as I continue to scroll down. Also, just a reminder too, there is actually a sale going on with Orbx Airports. Are any of your airports currently included in that sale, Jared?
They are. I do have quite a few, and if I'm going to give a shameless plug,
Please do.
my two most recent airports, which is obviously Monterey and Reading, those two are not on sale. They've both been released since January 1st. But all my previous titles are. So in backwards order, that's Bozeman for Central Rocky Mountains, and then Broome International, which we've been talking a little bit about tonight. Spokane, Phelps Field for Northern Rocky Mountains. What do we have before that? Jackson Hole, Anacortes, Cairns International, which again we were talking about, and Jandakot. So there's a few there that are mine, but obviously all the Orbx products are on sale. It's a really good bargain. I have no idea about when next time there is one, but the sale's really good. It's 33% off. And the other thing to bear in mind as well is that a lot of the older products are already quite well discounted already, so you can pick up some of those earlier ones for a pretty cheap price, to be honest. So if you're looking for a bit of an excuse, it's probably a good time to head over and pick up a few of the older titles.
Excellent. And then for you, Jared, actually at the very bottom of the list, I think Piloto Pirks and Namal have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, so I'm just seeing them come up now. So sorry, just Namal's question there. I'm not quite sure 100% if I'm interpreting it right, but the lights that I'm using in Monterey are a combination of, so for the majority of the coverage area, I'm using the new global type of lights, which we've also been using in all our most recent region and airport products. So you'll see them in Northern California and Reading and all the new airports as well. So those are the really frame rate friendly lights that were first introduced with Global. And then around the airport itself, so the runway lights that you see there used a little bit more of a more bespoke approach. So there's something a little bit more customized to the airport itself. In just the second question there from Pilato, is what developer you admire the most? Now, this is a loaded question, and I've got to say I'm a little bit of a fanboy for a lot of different scenery developers. Obviously, there are so many really talented guys on the Orbx team that I feel quite so privileged to be a part of that. And I mean the stuff that other guys are developing at the moment, I'm in awe of. And even and outside of the Orbx sort of staple as well, I know that in the interview that I did with Air Daily X last year, I answered this in a little bit more detail. But I mean, I have an enormous amount of respect. I think coming from someone who knows how much time and how many late nights and how much work goes into even what seems to be a relatively small project, for anyone else that does this, I think I have a good understanding of how much it takes to do a good quality product, and some of the stuff that I'm seeing at the moment is just absolutely amazing. But I think guys like the Fly Tampa guys have always been a team that I've always looked up to and sort of really taken a lot of inspiration from, and I mean guys like Flight Beam, the stuff that they're doing is sensational as well, and obviously the 29 Palms guys is great. And I mean, I'm selling a lot of other people short because I could rabbit on for hours about my respect and admiration for the different scenery guys that are around at the moment. Is there any other question? Just having a read through. I think that's all the main questions. Is there anything else there that I have missed?
No, I pretty much went through them. I didn't see anything else. Mostly everyone talking amongst themselves. I'll just do a one more one through really quickly one more time. DP Drive was asking, will England be updated to prepared V2? I can tell you without a doubt it absolutely will be. I think I can answer for Orbx on that. In fact, that's a region that I'm waiting for myself. I personally hail you, Jared, as I think the leading developer for Orbx, and that's my own opinion, but you're certainly my favorite on the team. But definitely I have a huge level of admiration for Lars and Martin and the work that they do, not just for Orbx, but for themselves and for Aerosoft and all of the other collaborations that they've done. And one of the airports that's, one of my top favorite airports is the Southampton. So I'm looking forward to getting England done fairly soon. I can also say that in regards to Monterey and Reading, those two airports will be covered in the second volume of my tour of Northern California. So if you've missed the first part of that review was mostly just going in and visiting default airports because I needed to get from one part of California to the other. So naturally, a lot of those airports are just default. So going forward, or I shouldn't say default, because I actually got a bit of a complaint from the guys who worked on all of those airports that are not full resolution airports in terms of like Monterey here, but the team actually did. They went in and they really kicked ass, and pardon my language, but they went in and they made those airports as realistic as possible for the entire coverage, and it's thousands of airports that I think that they've done. So I definitely want to give a shout out to them, because I know one of the things that I said in the review was, oh, I hate default airports, but obviously when you put it in comparison to Monterey here, there's definitely a difference. So going forward in the other volumes of 2 and 3, they will be all add-on airports, and what I will do once those are released is I will then go in and separate out the airport coverages into separate ADX first looks. So for those who want to skip to certain airports, you'll certainly be able to have it. But I think the best part about during the tour is not only showcasing California, but of course also showcasing the airports that have been developed for it. And there is quite an extensive list going forward. And I think I'm going to be in biggest trouble is once Southern California is released, because now we are right on my doorstep. Right now we're sort of in my backyard, it's California, but once Southern California is released, we will be literally right on my doorstep. And I just can't imagine in terms of what airports you all have already decided. I'm sure, because John has already mentioned it, I'm sure there must be airports that you all already have in mind, and I can only imagine what some of those airports might be. And so I just know that I'm going to be in trouble, because once the list comes out and these airports start getting developed, I'll probably be putting most of my focus just in Southern California alone. So, and I can say that there are a number of other developers as well that are developing for Southern California. The only one that I can mention at this time is Latin VFR, who's working on Santa Ana, and of course that's also in my backyard as well. So a lot of focus coming to California. So certainly an exciting time for me. Hopefully an exciting time for flight simulation enthusiasts as well. At least I would certainly like to hope so, because certainly if what we're seeing so far with Reading, with Monterey here, and of course with the previews that we've seen from Misha, with I'm sorry, not previews, but with the announcement that we've seen for Misha's upcoming Lake Tahoe, I imagine just looking at his Siku and Vernonia, his level of talent has gone up a step each time. So I can only imagine just how amazing Lake Tahoe is going to be as well. So that's 3 airports just then, and of course there are other developers like Turbulent Designs and so on and so forth who are also, and Sim 720 also.
And even within the Orbx Orbx team as well, there are a couple of things that haven't been announced yet, which I won't go into detail about, but there are particularly a couple of projects that I'm very looking forward to, which will be announced at some point in the future. So yes, there are a couple other things on the radar that aren't just around California, obviously with the emphasis on Northern California at the moment, but there are other things in the works, and certainly things that I'm personally quite excited about as well. I see just a little bit of a last minute question here as well on the side here from Michael, just about approaching scenery development from the newer airports like Monterey and some of the older airports, and asking is there a difference in technique used? I suppose for me, there's not been a massive change in the way that I've developed any of my airports over the last 6 or 7 projects that I've worked on. But with each airport that I do and with each new project that I look at, there's always a couple of things that I learn along the way from a previous project, or there's sort of lessons that I pick up along the way, and that just help improve things. So whether that's tweaking performance, or looking at ways to better optimize scenery. To be perfectly honest, that's probably one of the big things that keeps changing over the last couple of projects, is just working out ways to get a little bit more bang for buck in terms of polygon and texture usage. That's probably the biggest thing for me personally that I've changed. And obviously, listening to the community, there are different things that become sort of hot topics that I pay attention to. And obviously, the car park detail was a big fad of last year, and certainly was something that I looked at incorporating with both Reading and Monterey. And obviously, there's different things at the moment. So I know there's been a little bit of discussion about including the whole cityscapes with things like the packs in Manila and whatnot over the last couple of weeks. Of discussion has turned to that, and then obviously what Russ has been doing with his new project with the interior of the airport, and sort of the discussion that's been picked up from that. So I'm certainly trying my best to listen to all that feedback and then incorporate what I can realistically do. Some things that I think are the way to go forward, and some things that again are things that I need to sort of weigh in and balance out as to whether there's something that's realistic or not. And that's always sort of a bit of a debate that needs to be had at the start of every project.
Well, I think we've had some very, very intuitive insight just in regards to you, Jared, and your development techniques. And I don't know what you're planning on next. And you can plead the fifth on this question. Is your next airport going to be a FTX NCA, or are you heading back to another region?
I've got to be 100% honest. I don't actually know what I'm doing next yet.
Oh, wow.
I haven't signed off on it yet. It's been 2 weeks since I finished Monterey. I spent about a week of that in deep hibernation, catching up on a very great deal of sleep deprivation.
Right, I can imagine.
This week I've been working on getting Reading up to prepared 2.0 standard. I've got a few other bits and bobs. I've got 3 airports on my short list. I won't give away any sneak peeks yet, just in case I don't actually go ahead with any of them. But at the moment, it's a little bit of doing some research, working out what the best way to go forward is, seeing if I can get things lined up to make projects go ahead. But that'll be a decision I'll be making in the next week or so. But as of tonight, I don't actually know what my next project is.
Well, I definitely think it's important for you to get your rest. Please do rest those hands of yours, because looking at the work that you've done here today, I can only imagine that you must do push-ups on your fingers just to be able to keep up with the amount of hand work and mouse work that goes into definitely compiling something like this. And Drive was saying, I saw something. Oh yes, one of the readers was saying the mall. Take some rest, Jared. Great job, and certainly what we've seen here today is a great testament of your abilities and skills as a developer. I am a fan of yours. I admire the work that you do, and I certainly appreciate you just taking the time to come on with me this morning, because I know it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in Perth for you, so it's not easy, and your girlfriend is probably trying to sleep and everything. And of course, once you get to the latter end of the development process towards release, that's when you really start really hounding it in and putting in the extra effort. So I'll speak on behalf of myself as a flight simulation enthusiast. I greatly appreciate the effort and the work that you do, and of course your level of detail, and it's incredible. So again, thank you so much for coming on with us this morning. For everyone who has joined the stream this morning as well, thank you for coming in and joining us. Hopefully you have found it to be informative. Hopefully you like the scenery, and you will go out and buy it today. And if not, then definitely head over to Orbx and take advantage of the sale that they have going on now, because as we all know, they are very rare. So now is the time to take advantage of some of Jared's older projects as well. And before we sign out, Jared, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Just take an opportunity to thank you very much for having me down tonight, and thanks everyone for tuning in and having a listen to what we had a discussion about. And I know I do say it a lot, but it does mean a lot, all the support that I get from both yourself and the rest of the AirDailyX guys over the years, and to all our customers and sinners in general. It does genuinely mean a lot to have that kind of support, and I really do appreciate it. So thanks again, and thanks very much for checking out Monterey.
Thank you. And then Jared, just stay on with me just for a moment. And for everyone who's joined us this morning, again, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check out all of today's news at airdailyx.net, and we will see you next time for the next live stream, everyone. Enjoy your Saturday and have a great weekend.
Catch you later.